I'm Mr. MegaManFan. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. You know all the things to do. Hey, we've got kind of a 2-for-1 deal here today. I'm going to try out this 8BitDo USB wireless adapter 2 with the Evercade Versus. And I'm also going to try Toaplan Arcade 3 and see if it was worth the $20 or not. I figured for something with a lot of shooters on it, I would probably want a wireless controller, and I'm going to pair it with a PS4 controller, and we're going to see how it works out. So I left a standard controller in port 2 just in case I needed to break out to a menu and there wasn't a menu button mapped to the PS4 controller. But it turned out that wasn't a problem because you can go into the settings on the Versus and do custom mapping for any wireless controller you pair through the 8BitDo receiver. You just hold down a button on the controller until it shows up in the menu, and then it lets you pair each individual button. Now, the only problem I ran into is I had to use one of the triggers. I used R2 for the menu button because it wouldn't recognize the PlayStation logo as a button. So if you have a game where you need all 4 triggers, that could be a problem, but for me, I didn't see any reason not to do it. Toaplan has a history of well-made shoot-'em-up games, and Batugan is no exception, although I was a little confused by the fact there were 2 Batugan games and one was labeled Special Version. It turns out that version was shown at a trade show and later ported to home consoles, but never actually got into wide release in the arcade, so it's kind of a nice bonus that they included it here, and their own write-up on it suggests that it is the precursor to modern-day bullet hell games. So if you're an expert on shoot-'em-ups, you can decide if that statement is accurate or not. I don't know that history well enough to say, wow, this was the first official bullet hell shooter, or this was the game that all bullet hell shooters took their imprint from and built on. Maybe that's the case. All I know is that I don't know the enemy layouts in Batugan because this is my first time playing it, so I got my ass handed to me rather quickly. And then, comically enough, I ended up with a massive power-up that just looked like a spread shot from Contra on steroids. It took out everything and anything in sight. And even stranger still, I got it in the middle of this deep purple boss fight, so I assume there is a leveling system of some kind and the game rewards you for the amount of points you've scored or bullets you've landed, because there it is. It's like a laser shot and a spread gun combined into one. And even though I died here, I managed to get it back immediately, so I guess once you earn a power-up, it stays with you. And then I took it on to the next stage and continued to absolutely wreck everything with it. I assume at some point you would meet a boss where this would be kind of useless because they would be even more powered up than your shot, but for the time being, it's really doing the job. But hey, let's switch gears and look at that special version of Batugan. Now, it's worth noting that there's another feature I discovered once I had an 8BitDo retro receiver plugged into the Evercade Versus. Mapping for analog support is a beta option in the settings menu, which means it's not in its final form, it's not fully functional yet, but I did find out that it's the only way to play Murtop wirelessly, because otherwise it doesn't recognize the D-pad as controls when you're playing the game. It expects either a D-pad plugged in directly to the Evercade Versus or an arcade stick like on the Evercade Alpha. But if you enable that mode and you're using something with analog sticks like a PS4 controller, they will work like the joystick on the Alpha. So I highly recommend it for some of these shooter games where you're moving around the screen and your direction affects which way you're firing and enemies are coming at you from all sides. It's not so important for some of these auto-scrolling games like Batugan and Batugan Special Version, but later on in this Toaplan collection, you will see that it comes in handy. And so far, I'm really enjoying Arcade Collection 3. I'm not really surprised because, again, Toaplan is known for shooters, so they have a reputation for quality. Even their ports to home consoles like Sega Genesis were always quality, and I have several of those in my collection. So I am just as pleased playing these arcade versions, and I'm not noticing any lag or slowdown or any issues playing the games either with the controller or on the console itself. The only failures I have are my own failures for not knowing the enemy patterns as well as I should. But here I took advantage of the fact that I had already fought Deep Purple before on the standard version, and I waited until it was on the screen, and then I fired my special once per level enemy clearing bomb. And that weakened the enemy to the point that it really didn't take long for me to finish it off. So that's probably not the viable strategy for every boss fight, but it sure worked on that one. Here we go with Fix8, and this is one of those games where I would say the analog support is greatly helpful because you need to change directions on the fly pretty fast, and a D-pad doesn't necessarily lend itself to that. As you can see, this is not an auto-scroller. The screen only moves when you move. And this one I'm not at all familiar with. I was at least familiar with the names of some of the titles on here, like Batugan and Truxton, but I would venture to say that Fix8 is better known in Japan than the United States, and that's the joy of getting collections like this, is getting to discover games that may not have been as widespread or popular in arcades in this country as they were in other places. And the arcade scene, in some respects, actually fared much better in Japan than the United States because it seems like they had more of a culture of going to the arcades, whereas here, once home consoles came out and you could get arcade ports on home consoles, it seemed like arcades dwindled for a while. Then they made a comeback with fighting games like Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat, and parents got all up in arms about the blood and the violence, and it's kind of silly in retrospect when there are far more gory things you can play today. I mean, it's like that same issue that they had with Night Trap. That is such a low-brow, low-impact form of cartoonish violence compared to just about anything you could watch on network television. So the fact they got so upset about Night Trap just seems absurd in hindsight. But I digress. What I'm saying here is that you can discover new games that didn't make an impact in the arcades, either because arcades were declining in the United States or these games were just never marketed and sold in the United States and stayed exclusive to the territories where they came from. Now, I had to turn down the volume on this next one because for some reason Gox, if that's how you pronounce it, was super loud compared to every other game on this collection. And quite frankly, of all the games in this Toaplan arcade collection, Gox is the one that I don't really recommend. It's an Arkanoid clone. And it's an Arkanoid clone that has some elements that you would find in games like Alien Crush and Devil Crush, where enemies appear on the screen and you have to take them out to advance. But it is basically Arkanoid. You're clearing blocks and getting power-ups. So it's not bad. It's just not anything special. And for a company that I know best for shoot-'em-up games, to see an Arkanoid clone was a surprise, and not one that I exactly thought was a pleasant surprise. It's, like I said, it's not terrible, it's just not something I highly recommend. Getting back to something a little more like I expect from Toaplan, here's Outzone, and this is another game where analog support is really beneficial. In fact, I would say even more so than Fix8, because quite frankly, I found it unplayable if I used the D-pad on my PS4 controller, but once I switched to using the analog stick to move around and to shoot, suddenly everything made sense. It is a fixed screen scrolling where you are only scrolling when you're moving, and as you're moving, more enemies are going to be revealed on the screen, and that's when you're going to want to be moving around very quickly to get out of the way of their shots, to pick up power-ups to enhance your abilities, and to control the rate of scroll so that you're not getting overwhelmed by too many enemies on the screen at one time. It is very crucial to use analog sticks, or just play it with a joystick on an Evercade Alpha, or plug in an arcade controller that's supported. I believe Evercade.info was where I found the list of which USB controllers and USB dongles were supported, and that's why I chose the 8BitDo Retro Receiver 2. So Evercade.info is a very valuable resource for a lot of these things. It's also where I got all of those unlock codes for the hidden games that you have to enter a password into the secret menu to get those games on your Alpha, your XP, or your Versus. So check out Evercade.info. Let's move on to the next game, though, Truxton 2, which I was very pleased to see because I actually have Truxton two ways. I have a loose cartridge and I have a Japanese version complete in box. So kind of cool that there's a sequel that's in the arcades and might be arcade exclusive, but I don't know that for a fact. But it's definitely something that, how do I put this? Well, I'm not good at it, not yet, but when you can play an arcade game at home and all you have to do is hit a button on the controller to insert another coin, learning how to get good at this is going to be infinitely better than if you only have a small amount of change in your pocket and you're in the arcade and you die right away and there's your money wasted and you're not going to have any money left to play any other games. So that's sort of a self-limiting factor of going to an arcade when you're a kid back in the day. Like, if you already know how to play Dig Dug, Pac-Man, Space Invaders, Galaga, you're going to stick to those games where you can get the most bang for your quarter, the longest amount of play time. You're going to be taking a huge risk if you put a quarter in something new that you've never done before and you're really bad at it. Are you going to want to invest another quarter after that, or are you just going to move on? So it's nice to be able to play games without those kind of fears in the back of your mind that your money is not being well spent. You know you can just keep pumping quarters into it if you really want to learn how to play the game well. And finally, the last game on this Toaplan collection is called Vimana or Vimana. Again, not sure if that's the correct pronunciation, but it's not like it came with a guide telling you phonetically how to say it, so whatever works. And this one I would recommend slightly more than Gox, but not a lot more. It's, well, even the manual and the bio that comes with it on the Evercade itself, if you go into the system menu and look at the cartridge collections, it says that the patterns are tricky. And I agree with that. They don't necessarily move in a way that you would expect from playing other shooters. They're sweeping in waves and then they're diving down at you, and your time to react to that is very low unless you already knew they were going to do that to begin with. And it's a lot. And I could get good at this, but it was very hard right away, especially compared to the other games. Like, Batugan was almost too easy, but Vimana was almost comically hard. So I don't know if that's going to be my favorite out of this collection, but 5 out of 7 ain't bad. As one of the commenters put it in one of my other collection videos, Data East 2, I believe, he said that was like 12 games for $1 a piece, or whatever the math was. It's like an incredible value for a bunch of arcade games when, as he said in his comment, you would pay $7 a piece on Switch for those same arcade games if you got the arcade ports anywhere other than a Data East arcade collection. Unfortunately, I feel bad for the same guy who left that comment because he lived in a country where import taxes are especially high and importers add extra duties on top of the import taxes that you have to pay. So he was kind of screwed when it came to getting Evercade stuff, but I told him if he's on holiday in the UK, he should probably pick up some stuff and bring it home with him because, hey, it seems like Evercade has a really big footprint in Europe and the United Kingdom in particular, as a lot of the retailers, like Funstock, are based in the UK. So Perhaps that is the way to go if you live in a country where import fees are really high. 2 thumbs up for the 8BitDo receiver and for this Toaplan arcade collection. I recommend both. They're each worth the $20 I spent. I'm Mr. MegaManFan, and as always, thank you for watching.